Hello everyone, my name is Holly and welcome back, or welcome if you're new. Today's video is a really exciting one as I'm always happy to be talking about fantasy, but specifically today I'll be recommending some amazing fantasy heavily crafted toward martial arts or just some type of fighting style technique that carries a story a bit more than your typical sword and sorcery fantasy. And not to toot my own horn here, but I think I have the perfect list for you today. All of these books are great and fit the genre very well, and they are all quite different and unique. But before we dive into the stack all about fighting and confidence, let's take a step back and make sure we're prepared mentally, the most important part of martial arts. Thank you BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. BetterHelp is convenient and affordable therapy. As someone who has gone through a lot of mental gymnastics this year, I can tell you right now that it always helps to have someone to talk to, and that's why I'm always excited to talk about BetterHelp. I know for me where I live, it's really hard to find a local therapist. There are almost no options for small town dwellers like myself, but BetterHelp takes that hard part completely out of the equation. They find you a licensed therapist in just a couple days. And all you have to do is answer a couple of questions on their website, and their flexibility is amazing. Say you don't like your therapist. Well, they make it super easy to change your therapist, and they make it so you could make that change and not have to worry about price or even insurance. So if you happen to be struggling or just like the idea of having someone to talk to, do not wait. I have a link for you, of course, at the top of the description box. It's going to take you to BetterHelp's website, and you're going to get 10% off your first month of therapy with that link. So you can try it out and see if it's the right thing for you and make that first step to start bettering your mental health. Thanks again, BetterHelp, for working with me today. Alrighty, so the first book that I highly recommend for some extra cool martial arts action scenes, and honestly the book that inspired this video, The Combat Codes. I can say without a doubt that The Combat Codes draws abundantly from martial arts. You can just tell immediately from the first few pages, everyone be kung fu fighting in this novel. It takes place in a dystopian world where nations have stored away their weapons of mass destruction in a mutual pact, and instead have champion fighters represent them for disputes over like land and resources and everything else on the political side of things. They even use Aloys in the fighting circles to enhance fighters. It's all super cool and really well done. The book also plays with the magic school trope, chosen one trope. There's like a master apprentice duo, as we have a character who works as a scout, and while looking for potential recruits in the slave circles, he spots an adolescent boy with remarkable martial arts skill, and that kind of jumpstarts the journey. Basically, you're never bored when you're reading this. I'd recommend this to someone who isn't into reading, or maybe they haven't read a book in years. I think this could get them excited to read again. And the sequel to this, which I'm really excited about, comes out really soon. The Art of Prophecy. This is a fantasy that I would recommend for Avatar, but for adults, or just like a more brutal Avatar, because you can enjoy Avatar: The Last Airbender if you're 90. So this released, was it last year? Oh my gosh, I think it was last year. I never got a chance to read it, but I finally picked it up in September and was absolutely blown away by it. I love adventure-y kinds of fantasy, but truly the fight scenes in this were the highlight here, as one would hope from a book like this. And it's why it's on this list in the first place. It felt very cinematic. It kept pacing and fight scenes interesting and not tedious to read whatsoever. And it also brought something new to the table with the added bonus of magic. My favorite thing. Like, we have a character who practices wind whispering. I don't know why I whispered when I said that, it just felt right, which allows her to send gusts of air into foes, leap on top of air currents and whisper across the room. There's another character who wields a weapon she can shift from whip to spear, which is pretty badass. I just love the blend of influences and references to the tradition of martial arts stories with the storytelling and plot beats as well, because the story itself is really good too. We have a character who is the chosen one. He's destined to kill the Eternal Khan and end the war, only for something very different to happen. And it thrusts like all of our characters, our main characters, into radically new situations than they ever thought they'd be in. It's fantastic. Wesley Chu is a master himself. The sequel just released, so you can continue the story even more, which I'm going to do very soon, and I highly recommend this one. So this next book, I think it would be a crime to not talk about it. You can't talk about martial arts fantasy without including Jade City, which is a completed trilogy, by the way. This is praised so highly from many people, as high as You can say Brandon Sanderson, Drew Abercrombie, Pierce Brown, Tamara Pierce. It has the emotional stakes, world building, plot, and pacing of the best of them. And I can describe this book as, it's like a gangster drama set in a 1950s East Asian fantasy city, which gives me like Hong Kong or Taiwan vibes, especially given the backstory surrounding it all. So if you love family crime dramas, this really hit a nice sweet spot of mixing fantasy and crime, which may appeal to Locke Lamora fans. And then you have the fun fight scenes, which again aren't tedious to read in my opinion. It's a really cool story. There's some low magic, I would categorize this as, since the only magic element being jade, which gives certain genetically susceptible people magical powers. This is a big element though for the like political subplot, so it's not like, I don't know if I'd consider it low magic. Would you? Is it high magic? I don't know, man. Anyways, in short, if you want a character-driven family crime saga with a little dose of magic and brawling, aka some like fist-to-fist martial arts dueling set in a East Asian atmosphere, definitely try this out. Though most of you have probably read it. So I have been talking a lot about long, big, chunky fantasy. Let's switch things up and let me recommend you something you can read like over a weekend. And that's Never Die. I was going to start this segment saying like, as a book that flies under everyone's radar, but I feel like this book gets a good amount of love in the SFF space, but honestly, it's so good, it deserves even more. This is the absolute most perfect story if you are looking for characters who use martial arts magic to fight for justice. We have a little boy who is brought back to life by a god of death and tasked with the assassination of the emperor. And to help with this like impossible task, he's gifted the power of resurrection. He must go around reviving the supernatural heroes to aid in his quest. And all of these like characters to steal your freaking heart. It is such a well executed bite-sized story, very, very short, with fun fight scenes that remind you of like old samurai movies. It's just plain freaking fun. Definitely one of my like most favorite books. I mean, just look at the cover. This could not scream more martial arts. Okay, so up next, I'm going to mention a book that I personally didn't love, but I'm going to recommend it because you might enjoy it, and that's all that matters. And it does bring martial arts to life, and that is A Hero Born. Oh man, this is a must read for fans of Kung Fu movies and Chinese history. This is an English translation of a Chinese novel originally published in the 1990s. I think it was the 1990s, specifically 1996. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's set in the 13th century during hostility between Mongolia and the Jin Empire. The story follows a young Chinese boy living in Mongolia who is trained in Kung Fu by masters of the martial arts. We do have that really cool aspect of it. We get to see the whole step-by-step process of growth and confidence. This book does have a lot of adventure, and there is a lot of violence as one would expect for this time period. It is very reminiscent of like the old tales of knights and chivalry, but instead of swords, which is your, typical medieval fantasy, the warriors fight with Kung Fu, and it's epic in that sense. Tons of martial arts battles, wise sages, and some like mystical eagles as well. This is a series too, I should mention, a long one actually, called The Legends of the Condor Heroes, so it doesn't stop here. I haven't read the second book, though I'm unsure if I will, but it is there if I decide to change my mind. I always say on this channel, I will never ever tell you not to read a book, and I will still bring up books that I personally just couldn't fully immerse myself in. But one of you might love this. And again, that's all that matters. So perfect martial arts story. Another book that I have to include in this epic list is The Poppy War, an older book for sure, and a popular one at that, following an unassuming orphan who turns out to be a very talented individual and is spirited away to the capital and to an academy to train for war. I feel like there's two groups of people when it comes to this book. You're either in the group that loved the first half and hated the second half, or you hated the first half and loved the second half. I am in that second group. The first 50% of this book is very school setting, and I personally, like, I'm not the biggest fan of school settings all that much. I mean, I hated school, so it makes sense. I don't hate them, I just don't sought after them. And it's a bit slower paced. You get the martial arts theme for sure, and then you see all of that work and build up surface in the second half. So it does have that satisfying fantasy crunch to it, where it all comes to fruition, as does the very grim and dark part of the story does as well. It is inspired by China's bloody 20th century history, so if you like dark adult fantasy that includes some like really interesting fighting, hand-to-hand combat, definitely add this to your list. Alrighty, I have one final book for you, and that is The Judas Blossom. This one might be stretching martial arts just slightly, but it has that like fighting technique element mixed into it that feels right to include it. This is a historical fantasy about the Mongol conquest of Persia and old magic resurfacing. The fighting is done with ancient weapons, but again, it just has that camaraderie, cultivation of inner strength, and like a spiritual stance fighting feel. It's a really enjoyable read and interesting as well, as this time period is often, I feel like it's forgotten about in fantasy, and to see it with an added twist of magic was captivating. So I really wanted to mention it here. Alrighty, so that is going to be it for this ultimate martial arts fantasy book recommendations list. Hopefully you found something worthwhile, worth checking out. Tell me below what books I should have added to this list that I need to check out myself. I know, before you say it, the Cradle series by Will Wright is heavily inspired by martial arts, but I haven't read it, so you'll have to just like yell at me in the comments about that too. Like this video if you found it useful, subscribe if you're not. I'd love to have you here, and until we meet again, happy reading.